van der Ven. Peter Donker is my partner in crime for this session. He will take over about halfway, a little bit beyond the half. So, as you already know by now, we should first welcome our sponsors and give them a big thanks for making this event possible. Luckily for me, the names are also on the posters next to the slide, so I don't stay long on this sheet. We're going to reveal today to you a couple of features that we think are worthwhile mentioning in the DNN 8 API. First, I start with a small introduction, and then we delve into the module settings API, the image handler, and that's where Peter takes over, the client dependency framework, and of course there's room for you for questions or any other remarks. First, the introduction. A little bit about myself, as already said, Serge van der Ven, or Sergey if you wish. I'm husband, father of 2 kids, 2 lovely kids. I like make some music, play a little bit piano, guitar, all that stuff. I love DNN. I would say I grew up with DNN, but that's unluckily impossible for me given my age. Nevertheless, I work for a company called Access. You may have heard from them. And for Access, I'm a lead consultant in the DNN solutions. So, but enough about me. You're all here for DNN, right? And you all work with DNN. Now, last year, I know there were a lot of you at the DNNCon in Millau. And there was a great attention for, obviously, DNN 8. It came out, the CTP2. And there was a lot of and awe about something that's called MVC and something that's called SPA. Now, without a doubt, these are major highlights of DNN 8. But there's more. So, ready to enter and reveal the hidden gems? As far as I'm concerned, we're gonna start moving onto the module settings API. Now, most of you, can everybody in the back read this a little bit? No? Should I enlarge it a little bit once in a while? That's better, eh? The code doesn't mean anything or doesn't say anything. Just by example, for those interested, this is from the DNN FAQ module. It's one of the open source, previously DNN Forge modules. But you all should be recognizing these kind of constructs, right? Now, as you may know, that these are all settings, and settings use strings, as you can see here and here. Strings to identify which setting you mean to address. They always use something like conversion. For those who cannot read in the back, it says something like convert to Boolean and to string. And you have to do that all over again each time you address a setting. And sometimes you even have to do some explicit default settings behavior. In this case, if the setting is not available, make it a 0. So you all recognize this. Now let's see some hands. Who has ever made some errors in their program just because they mistyped a setting? I see some hands a little bit low because, you know, I wouldn't be happy if I made the error myself. Errors in type conversion. You saved it as an integer and it should actually be a decimal or something like that. So how many of you built something there like their own custom wrappers? Luckily, a few people noticed the lacks of the previous DNN versions and maybe even incorporated that into a library or some sort of a library. Now, wouldn't it be great if you could just use settings as a strongly typed entity? Define a single class in your code that actually holds everything your module needs to know. And have a very intuitive interface to load, use, and save settings. And finally, with DNN 8, you can. Indeed, you no longer have to use strings anymore to load and save settings. I'll show you that in a minute. You no longer have to convert to and from strings anymore. So that should be a relief. And you can use strong types throughout your code just by using this single setting object. And you can combine, and I pretty like this one. You can combine module, tab module settings and portal settings all in one single object. And still, if you wish, have complete control over serialization and deserialization. Personally, I hardly use this one, but there are no people who do think that they should. So, first a little bit of background. I know this video is taped and it's available on channel 9, so I give sometimes a little bit more extra background information for those not so familiar with DNN, so that it can be used as more or less a learning video. So, settings in general, they are present as of the early days, at least version 3, but probably even before that. Settings are basically, as you know, key value pairs, both strings, and if you look at the DNN database, you will find that there are a lot of tables with these key value pairs, like the module settings, tab module settings, portal settings, host settings, etc. And they come indeed in 4 flavors. I already mentioned them. They're listed in the order of scope. So host is about your instance, portal is about a single website, module is about the single module, and the tab module is for a tab module itself. Now, as I already said, I'm a consultant for DNN, for Access, and I sometimes do reviews on code, and I noticed that many developers don't really know what tab module settings are for. So let me quickly give a short wrap-up about the tab modules. You're all aware that in DNN you can place a reference of a module on different pages, on multiple pages. If you use module settings, then all these instances of these modules share the same module settings, whereas the tab module settings are individual per module. I give an example when to use tab module settings versus module settings somewhere later on. Now, in general, settings are used to persist module behavior or instance-specific data, but thou shalt not persist content in settings. And believe me, I only met once, luckily, a customer who actually did this. So never ever. Okay, defining a new module settings API. What were our thoughts, our requirements? We were a little bit inspired by the so-called object relationships mappers. Like you all know the entity framework, maybe some of you know nhibernate, but you all know the DNN DEL2. As you know, these frameworks like to use attributes to define behavior, so we thought that might be a good idea for the module settings as well. We like to promote the DNN patterns, and especially the repository pattern. And it should, of course, be very easy to understand and very easy to use for any developer. So, as I said, inspired by the entity framework and DEL frameworks. So, what you see on the left, and I shall enlarge it a little bit for the folks in the back. Those of you building modules from version 3 and 4 should recognize something like this. This is basically a database entity where you have a hydratable interface and suddenly some code pops up here specifying exactly how these properties are persisted and loaded, in this case loaded, from the database. Now, weren't we all happy when the DEL2 arrived and suddenly, as you can see, there is no information about persistence anymore in this entity, other than some attributes on the properties. Now, and that's exactly what this is all about, attribute-based. There are attributes telling the system, in this case DNN, what table to map this entity to, or what column in that specific table to map this property to. And it also tells, it says here ignore column for the guys in the back, that this entity of this property should in fact not be persisted in the database. So, as a result, on the left-hand side is the same DNN entity you saw on the previous slide. But now on the right side you see the module settings, and I shall enlarge it again a little bit. And suddenly you see module settings are basically a simple class. There is no base class. If you wish, you can still define your own base class to share something, but there's no need for it. And you only have some plain properties with a name you can define yourself, and you decorate these properties with specific attributes. Now, I'll delve into these attributes in a moment. But you see here that there are some properties that don't have an attribute. Now, there's a difference between what the DEL2 does versus what the new module settings API does. The DEL2 says if you have an entity, then all these properties are persisted to the database unless you specify otherwise. Whereas the module settings API says if I have a plain old common object runtime class object, in general nothing is persisted unless specified specifically by you with these attributes. So, I already said I would give an example when to use the tab module settings. Now, if you look at the example given in this piece of code, you'll notice that I've made this property show tooltips. I've decorated that with tab module settings. Now, if you have a module and you build your own modules, probably all of you, it's always good to define module-specific behavior as how it responds and how it reacts as module settings, whereas the more user interface gimmicks or skinning or whatever you like to call it, those types of settings you would define as tab module settings. And in this case I've made a show tooltips a tab module setting, which means that I can place this module, the same module, on two different pages and have one display the tooltips, whereas the other doesn't. So, notice one small detail. It still can have defaults. It will come on the presentation later on, so I'll skip that in a moment. Now, as already said, one of the requirements was that it should be easy to understand and simple to use. Now, just have a quick look at some kind of view control. And you'll notice in the comments I wrote in the example code, I've given the example for the old plain web forms we all know, but if you use it for an MVC or an API controller, it's pretty much the same. And there's an example of that later on. Now, if you look at a simple page load of a module, you'll see that there's something like, oh, I have to do some kind of repository get settings module, and then all of a sudden I can use the settings I previously defined. So, first of all, you need to subclass this repository, and this repository has a method. It's called getSettings, and the getSettings basically takes in a module info type. And you're probably all aware of these types, and in this case you see with the this that it's part of this portal module base, and actually the API controller for the web API, the DNN web API controller, has a similar property. It's not called module configuration, it's called active module, but it's still the same type. So what you see here is that this repository actually creates this module settings POCO class for us. And it not only creates it, but it fills all the properties that you explicitly mapped or decorated with these attributes. and it does even a little bit more. Once these properties get filled, you can easily use them, and it's guaranteed that indeed this value of category type in this settings object is actually the value configured as a module setting for this specific module instance. So no need to hustle that around. Now, given two other examples, we like to use the DNN repository pattern, as already said. It's on the left-hand side here. Now you see that using this is very simple. There's a tendency to include the repository inside the module settings object, so that you can even further simplify the usage of the settings. Shall enlarge it a little bit again, although it does not really fit anymore. So what you see here is that incorporating the repository in your POCO class even simplifies loading of the settings and afterwards using of the settings. For sake of simplicity, I've made this a call to the save in a page load. It's not very common, but you can. What's more common is usage of the settings control. Again, it should be easy to use for you as a developer, so we didn't want you to do all these fancy stuff in the settings control. Basically, all you need to do, again, is instantiate a repository and just use the methods you have to override by this portal settings base class. You have to overload the load settings, which basically gets the settings, and you have to overload the update settings. And all there is in these implementations is nothing more and nothing less than actually mapping these together. And if you choose the right types for your POCO class, your settings class, there's no need for any type conversion anymore. Show categories is a bool, so it can directly be assigned to a control. The category type is a string, so it can directly be assigned to text. And likewise, in the update, it's the other way around, of course. So, what's in the box? I'll keep this short, not because I don't want to tell about it, but actually you as a developer shouldn't care about it. But for those interested, there is a abstract settings repository class which holds basically all the logic. And it takes a generic type, and that's basically your POCO class. The POCO class is on the left, and that's the class with all the properties and the mappings on it. And the mappings are, of course, these tab module settings, portal settings, etc. Now you see that there's caching in the middle, so the repository luckily uses a lot of caching to make it a little bit faster. And on the bottom you see the mapper, and the mapper is basically used to provide a one-to-one mapping between a property on your POCO class to an actual setting later to be used in the persistence and loading of these settings. Now that's about it, what I wanted to tell about what's in the box. But there's more, and I'm looking like a little bit of these Telcel marketeers. But nevertheless, there's something that we call custom naming. Now, especially if you upgrade your modules and you used to have some settings with a name that you rather not like to use, you can easily say, well, my new module uses the show empty categories property, but actually it is persisted like empty category. Or if you don't like long strings and rather have the database filled with short strings, you can use your own short strings. But then again, there is no need. If you don't specify the name, as in the previous examples, then the module settings API takes over the name of the property. In this case, show empty get queries. There's something that we call naming prefixing, and that's especially useful for portal module settings, or portal settings, excuse me. As you probably all know, portal settings, since they're portal-wide, don't have a module ID. So if you have 10 modules and they all have a setting called API key, then it's very likely that they will all crash. Because the API key is shared amongst all these if you put this in the portal module settings. So using a prefix, you can actually prevent such clashes. And I would highly recommend that if you ever use portal settings, use a prefix. And obviously a better prefix than this one. It should be more for your own module. By the way, as you see, I like to use constants. Sometimes I take the time to promote more usage of constants. There's even more. There's also something that's called default values. Just put in a number and it's done. And as you see, it works for nullables as well as non-nullables. Obviously, non-nullables have a default value given by the compiler. Unless it's a string, then it's also a default, namely null. Luckily for us, it also persists enum values, and you don't even have to do anything special with that. It just comes out of the box, serializes the enums. And I personally like enums quite a lot. You see, for this example, I've used the prefix example again, in this case because it's in the portal settings. There's custom deserialization, one of the things you might recall from the Yes We Can slide. Now, suppose you do have some kind of custom object here in the top. For the sake of simplicity, there are no properties or behavior in this, but it's just an empty class. And here in the bottom, I have my module settings. And I would like to have the module settings API persist this as indeed that specific object. Now then I can use the serialization method. I can specify a specific object, and the object is actually defined here above. And as you see, it only needs to implement a simple interface which holds two methods, serialize and deserialize, obviously from string to string, in order to get your object in the settings. So basically any class that implements the iSettings serializer can be used for that. Now I'm a pretty fan of making things very simple and even more solid, more stable. So I like to use wrappers. If you look at the code over here, again, it's based on the legacy web forms, but it works the same for the web API. I have a custom base class, my module base, and I just fill in the my module settings Pogo class, and all of a sudden I can directly use these settings. I know I don't even have to use this repository anymore, because this base class I use basically inherits from portal module base. It takes on the generic, it creates a private repository for me, it overrides, in this case because it's the portal module base and which already has a settings property, it overrides that one and it says, well, use the repository to get the settings and you're done. It's very simple, very, very simple. So, skip that one. And as already said, for the module, for the web API, just to show you that it actually works pretty much the same. DNN API controller, my API controller is a concrete class, and you see using the settings works exactly the same. So No need to do something else there. So to wrap it up, I would say start using this module settings API. It's very simple. Define your own POCO, add some attributes. You see them here. Subclass the settings repository, and then you're free to decide what method you prefer, whether to use the repository standalone or within a POCO. And your code will be cleaner and more stable. So, for those who want to take a picture, feel free. I'll quickly step over to the module of the image handler. It's a little bit shorter, Peter, so no worries. Okay, the image handler. It's all about this. Who thinks this is good or bad? Would you say it's bad? Well, surely I have to give a little bit of context. Suppose this is a listing of product with thumbnails, then this probably is not such a good idea. However, as said, it's good unless the source image is pretty large or the image does not exist. So wouldn't it be nice if you could quickly add some image rendering capabilities, render these images, render even a default image if it doesn't exist, add some basic transformations like resize or rotate or adjust brightness, anything you wish. And luckily with the new image handler in DNN 8 you can. You can even control the images that need to be loaded. Image permissions are checked. You can process them once they're loaded. It has some caching, very nice. So time to rewrite this one into this one. And here you see something that's called an ASEX. For those who recall from the pub quiz, it is actually a handler. So you handle HTTPS. The image handler is in fact a HTTP handler. Any class that does that basically is instantiated by the request. And then IIS takes care of the creation of your image handler, of your HTTP handler, once it's get registered in the config. For those who cannot see, again, this is a piece of the web config of DNN 8, and then you notice that the image handler is indeed registered in the web config. And basically all it does, it processes a request that's coming in from the browser. It has usually some query strings, and it renders the content. And the image handler does that by transformations. There's a first transformation, which is basically the loading of the image, and then you can have, in theory, any number of subsequent transformations. It's determined by the query string arguments, and it works a little bit like for each. You get an image in, you get an image out. So this works like this. You start with an empty image, that does the image handler. Then you have the first transformation, which loads the image, and then you have subsequent transformations. And in this case, I've called it process 1. That could be resize, process 2 could be rotate, or whatever you wish, until you finally get the image you need. For the start transformation, there are a couple of built-in methods. You can easily get the profile picture. There's a placeholder. I'll have an example of that later. You can load secure files, so by file ID. You can load the file by URL. There's a custom mode in the web config. I won't elaborate on that one. So, but just as an example, if you have your own module, then you can easily write your own loading of the images. In DNN 8, there are available resize, gamma, brightness, contrast, grayscale, invert, and finally rotate, flip. And it's in this order that they're all executed, if present on the query string arguments. So, time for a little example. Here you see 3 different examples of using such an image handler. 2 are used with the placeholder mode. You'll see that here. And 1 is the profile picture mode, and you see There's a start transformation, it's the mode. There's a resize transformation here, and a rotate flip over here. So, wrapping that up, I would say start using this image handler. It has a simple syntax. You can apply it to any default image. If the image is missing, then it's loading the default. Can be used in your own modules, but it can also be used in a plain HTML module. The examples you saw were just built in a plain HTML module. Don't overuse it. If you have just a couple of small buttons in your module, then definitely don't use it. It has some nice future extensions, I think. I would like to have a watermark transformation once in a while. So don't reinvent the wheel and use the image handler. Again, if you wish to make a picture, here you find it in the DNN library, and then it's the breakpoint time.
DNN modules. So the old world web forms, we used to handle all of our events on the server side. Now we're shifting everything to the client side. And to support this, I mean, there's been an explosion of very useful and sometimes less useful JavaScript libraries. And I'm just going to cancel that because I don't actually need it. And another development I would like to highlight is that more and more I find myself wanting to load a specific CSS framework that may or may not have already come with the skin. I don't know. I'm the module developer. I have my module, but I want to have a nice admin layout, for instance, for my module, nice buttons, nice text boxes. So the typical examples would be using Bootstrap because it handles all of that layout stuff. But I don't know if Bootstrap is already in the skin or not. I just work in my little square on my site, on a site. So, yeah, one of the downsides is that none of these JavaScript libraries or CSS libraries were ever designed with this use case in mind, right? They were designed like, okay, well, this is for your whole site. You just have one that comes out. So what we're finding is that more and more there's clashes happening. So you would have Bootstrap being sent by the skin and by the module. That is not an uncommon scenario to happen. Mostly these things kind of like don't cause the whole site to break, but you see some ugliness happening left or right because of it. So how do you add your client-side dependency? Well, you basically in the old days there's an old-fashioned DNN way. And if you're really awful and you don't know about this, you might actually do a direct link. And I'll give you an illustration of that in a second, what that does. And there's a new DNN way. So this is the hidden gem that we'll be talking about. And I'm going to dig straight in. So here we go. Let's have a look. I have a small project here. So two modules. I'm going to call it CDF1 and CDF2. They are trivial modules, just hello DNN connect from 1 and hello DNN connect 2 from the second module. And what I've done is I've stuck these on a page. So here you go. You see at the top you see CDF2, right? The second module and the first module, there's two copies of them. So I have stuck 2 copies of this module, one here, and there's a second module up here. Now, if I'm just going to make sure that the site is alive and refresh the page. Okay. Now let's say that for argument's sake, I would like to add, I have here in the solution, I have, you'll see Bootstrap and test.js. So I have a JavaScript file and Bootstrap. And these 2 module developers have both decided in their infinite wisdom that they want these files to go out over the wire because that's what they're using for on the client side. So for on this one, I'll do something very simple. So go for a link. So okay, well, my desktop module here is connect/cdf1, and this is a style sheet. I'm going to go for bootstrap.min.css. Right? And I'm going to do the same thing for a script. So I have a script here, connect/cdf1/test.js. All right. And I'm going to copy this over to the second solution and make sure that the second ones are coming in here as well, cdf2. So, and just to make sure, like the default solution here, the skin that is delivered with DNN 8, and the makers are in the room here, they does actually include Bootstrap here, right? So you can see this path, I hope. It comes with portals, default skins, Xilium, Bootstrap, CSS, Bootstrap min, CSS. So that one comes out from there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rerun the page. Now, how many bootstraps do you think are going to be requested by this page in the end? How many? 3? 3? Okay, we're just going to refresh the page, right? Let's have a look. Oh, it's actually breaking, probably because I did not close a tag somewhere. That's right, I might have to kind of script, close a tag as well. Let's close the tag here. And I wrote these little snippets just before the presentation. I was like, okay, that's going to save me a bit of typing, but of course you have to do them correctly. There you go. We're back here with the page. 1, 2, 1. Where did 1 go? That one vanished very quickly. 1, yeah, and 2, yeah. All right. Not to worry. It should be okay. Well, let's first of all check what is going over the wire. So, out of all the bootstraps, I have one coming from CDF1. I have one coming from CDF2, and I have the one coming from the CDF. From the skin. So I have 3 going over the wire at the moment. And in terms of the scripts, we saw in the console, so there's the script is kind of just will log something. So I ran and I ran 2. So we should see I ran twice, but okay. For some reason, the first one dropped off. But in the interest of time, let's go to, step it 1 level up and say, okay, well, we're going to do it the official DNN way, and we're going to get rid of these because this is, of course, something you would never, ever, ever do, right? That's just not good. All right, save this, save this. Now, how would you do it? Well, your module would, of course, do a DNN CSS include. All right, so it's we've got to get the casing, of course, right as well, though. Include, and it's going to be run at equals server, right? And I'm going to go for file path equals, and we're going to go for the squiggly line, desktop modules /connect/cdf1/ bootstrap.min.css, and we're going to close this tag. That's it. All right. Now, that's one, and the other one, of course, is DNN JS include run at equals server file path. As you can see, it's between the two sides, whether it's JS or CSS, there are many similarities. And of course, in the framework, they're more or less treated at many places as equal as well. CDF2 slash CDF1 1 dot test dot JS. Right now, do we at least see these modules come out? Still, all right. You see these coming out, and now I'm going to copy this over to this part and say, okay, well, I want these as well from CDF2. Right, not missing any, no typos here. That should just work. All right, for some reason, it's eating up my tag preface. It's eating up this. Let's have a look. Why is this not accepting it? DNN CSS include, for sure. For some reason, it...
Oh, you missed an L.
Yeah. Include, thank you. There you go. That's the great thing about doing live demos, is you're bound to make some typo somewhere. Yeah. All right, they're back. So now, how many bootstraps? Still 3, right? So let's have a look. Check, here we go. Still the bootstrap coming out from CDF1, still coming out from CDF2, and still coming out of the skin. And in terms of the console, so you see I ran and I ran 2. At this point in time, the script did only run once. The same script that came out of module number 1. But, okay, now what we can do at this point in time is say, well, and so this is a new feature, right? So what we need to do somehow in the client dependency framework is try to determine that, hey, we've got all these bootstraps going out. Now we need to figure out some way to make sure that it's just one going out. So what we've added is 2 attributes. Very simple. Name and version. So in this case, bootstrap, and let's say this is a 336, right? And I don't actually know for sure, but I will check that out. Name equals test that we have, version equals, I don't know, 001. And let's have a look. Bootstrap here is 336, that's correct. And the bootstrap here, for instance, is a 400. So interestingly enough, it's 400. And we're going to replicate that code that is here, right? Do the same thing in this module. And now it's 400. And the other one I'm going to just leave as it is. I'm going to say, well, this is actually my second version of this very famous script that I'm running. At this point in time, oh yeah, sorry. Thank you for reminding me. And actually, just for this demo purposes, I think of course, the use case would be that this one does not have this, and this one does not have this, right? That would be the use case. And let's try it again. So at this point, we get our script still running, and in terms of the CSS, we should see that only one bootstrap has now come out. So the client dependency framework was augmented with a couple of settings that will say, okay, well, I will collect all the same names underneath each other and just pick the highest version number. This will not resolve any issue you have on the client side, but it will resolve quite a few you're having, and at least reduce, page load on unnecessary bootstraps. The one thing I would ask the skin developers to do is to use the same pattern, because that way we're all, right, the skin developers basically use the same thing. They use the same framework. So if we all adhere to the same standard, we can actually avoid bunches of CSS frameworks being sent over the wire. And we can do that with JavaScript as well. There's just one more remark I want to make as we're wrapping this up, is please, 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 try to stick to a very simple convention, which is for the name, just use whatever is in front of the min.css or the min.js. I don't enforce any of the naming, so it's free. But if you're going to use like name equals my bootstrap, yeah, that's not going to clash with bootstrap, right? So just say bootstrap, lowercase, whatever. I think it's case insensitive. I'm pretty sure of that. But yeah, just stick to that convention, and it should work. So yeah, use it, please, everyone, and we'll have a happier world without many clashes. Any questions regarding this part, client dependency framework? Peter. No, we do not, exactly. So there is a convention in the software world which says, we remain backwards compatible when we release new versions. Obviously, there's going to be moments when, for instance, Bootstrap 2 to 3, for instance, that was a disaster, right? Or disaster, I mean, that was not compatible. So at that point in time, yeah, it's a very, in that sense, very dumb framework. It just says, well, whatever is the biggest version, I'll serve out that. Basically, actually, that would have been an unsolvable situation anyway, right? It doesn't make it better, but it doesn't make it worse either, your problem. Because if your module would have said, I depend on Bootstrap 2, and I'm going to send that over the wire, and your skin was Bootstrap 3, yeah, means your module is going to have issues anyway with this skin. But at least that 2 is not going to go over the wire and screw up the rest of the skin. So that's... Other questions about CDF? Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, so size of the page. Bootstrap, I think, is off the top of my head something on the order of 250K. Just like, yeah, something like that. So you would have saved half a megabyte just by using it in this. Of course, this is an extreme example where you have two modules, but as a module developer, I want to, in the future, have the liberty to use CSS frameworks without getting wrapped by skin developers saying, hey, why are you doing this when we want to develop the skin? I'd like my modules to look better using those frameworks, so I think this is the way forward for module developers. Yeah. So you have some place in your site and say, hey, there's something wrong because I find I think it wouldn't be difficult to log when clashes happen when it's taking them out. Right. Yeah. 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 Where would you like that logged, by the way? Where just in the site log, or well, I mean the site log is going to fill up with that. Or even, the event log is going to fill up with that because it's actually normal behavior, and the well, I mean clashes in the sense of it. Yeah, but it's not something you can resolve out of the. So let's say my module uses. Let's take a good scenario, right? So my module uses Bootstrap 336. Bootstrap 4 has come out, the skin uses 4, 4 is going over the wire. I don't think the admin needs to know that 336 was not sent down the wire. Maybe if there needs to be some kind of an analysis situation where the user gets back to the module developer and says, hey, doesn't look like your screenshot, we might need some kind of an analysis tool to say, okay, well then show me if there were any clashes. But it should, of course, the good behavior is that it does remove clashes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, 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 and then exactly, and that can indeed. You could imagine analysis tools to, let's say, see what the CDF is actually doing. I had to go into how this whole, yeah. No, are not using this yet. No, 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 no. I hope that this presentation will help going forward. There's no guarantees. Obviously, we're going to have to keep pounding this issue. I can imagine that there might be some analysis tool in the future which actually shows where clashes are happening. Yeah. 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 Something like that, or even just like including it in the HTML, saying, by the way, I removed this, But I'm in favor also of using another very little known feature. It's not used in DNN 8. It's not. It goes back to DNN 6, but there is actually a Boolean host setting called debug mode. Yeah, and anyone can leverage that Boolean to say, okay, at this point I'm just going to pump out a lot of information to the hard disk, and then if my customer says, oh, by the way, something's not working, okay, switch to debug mode and send me that file, right? Another hidden gem. Salar.
Is this obviously have this when we do a Google mobile test
Yeah.
on a page, it usually comes up with you need to do CSS and JS modification.
Yeah.
This will solve.
Yes, actually, it's independent. So the question is, how does the minification fit into this, right? With talking about Google's index and ranking and whatnot. So the way the client dependency framework works is it first does a step of gathering everything and putting it in order because of priority and everything, and then it does the minification. If you've said minify, it does that. So actually, this just sits at a different part of the process. It's independent from the minification. That just happens afterwards anyway. If you use that. Sasha?
More a remark. I have a lot of time that kind of problem, so I'm very happy.
Good.
But I was always thinking to solve that problem by using the JavaScript libraries in DNN.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you only have one time to make a library, and each model we use the same library.
Yeah. But the problem, yeah. Yes. But here's one of the problems is that, first of all, that's a reduced set, right? It's just jQuery, jQuery UI, and a few others. So you have to install, for instance, the typical example for me would be React, right? And there are different React versions now, so yeah, you have to make sure that they don't clash. So for in this situation, it doesn't get rolled out by default by the platform, so you'd have to install it, create a more complicated package for your module. I looked at that, really, and I was like, oh my God, that's, no.
I always want to say, when you install your module, some libraries
Yeah.
automatically.
Yeah. So for a while now, I've been saying, look, we need to have just the convention where I can say my module has it, it's here, and if this is the best version you have, serve that one. That's the way. So thank you. I think we're done, right? Time's up. Time's up. All right.